Need a refresher on the Game of Thrones lore before getting into House of the Dragon? Hey, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's been a few years since the original series ended, and I really wouldn't blame anyone for checking out completely after its very controversial conclusion. If you're one of those people, or you're just looking for a quick overview of the Game of Thrones timeline compressed into 15-ish minutes, then you've come to the right place. Just keep in mind that there will be some corners cut here and there in order to fit this into 15-ish minutes. But without further ado, we begin our journey over 12,000 years before the start of the original series. The continent of Westeros was devoid of humans and only inhabited by giants and a non-human magic-using species called the Children of the Forest. The Children of the Forest lived peacefully until the big bad humans, referred to as the First Men, invaded. Thus began the war between the First Men and the Children. Even though the Children were able to use their magical abilities against the First Men, the sheer number of humans that invaded would prove to overwhelm the Children of the Forest. Don't get me wrong though, the Children put up a good fight, as evident by their capture of a human and creation of the first White Walker. This was an attempt to find a way to overcome the human numbers during the war, an attempt that they would sorely regret later on. The war ended when the two sides came together to end the bloodshed and agreed to let the First Men settle throughout Westeros while the Children resided deep in the forest of the continent. Somehow that White Walker the Children created ended up getting loose, turning on the Children, and was now determined to end all life instead of just being a weapon against humans. 2,000 years go by and an extremely long winter, I'm talking generations long, shrouded Westeros in darkness. This period was dubbed the Long Night. Under the guise of this seemingly eternal darkness, the White Walkers invaded from North Westeros, resulting in the First Men and the Children of the Forest coming together to fight off the Walkers and send them back up north. Sadly, their victory didn't come without consequence, at least for the Children, because after this war, the Children of the Forest officially began to disappear from Westeros. In order to ensure the White Walkers didn't return, a human by the name of Brandon Stark created the infamous Wall, and unintentionally trapped all the First Men who lived north of it. These groups of humans north of the Wall would go on to call themselves the Free Folk, or as those south of the Wall would call them, the Wildlings. Brandon Stark also founded Winterfell, the Night's Watch, and House Stark, and all the other great houses throughout Westeros would begin to spawn after these events as well. Soon after, another race of men called the Andals decided it was their turn to invade and traveled all the way from Essos to make their mark on the continent. And true to their intentions, they left an everlasting mark on Westeros and the First Men as they spread their cultural traditions such as knighthood and chivalry and religious beliefs and conquered much of the continent. The only exception to their conquering spree being the First Men of the North like the Starks and the Mormonts, since they were able to push them back and maintain their culture. After generations of Andals living in Westeros, there was no longer any point in distinguishing their race from the First Men, since the two groups had intermingled and intermarried so much that the peoples eventually stopped being seen as distinct groups. Meanwhile, across the sea in Essos was the Empire of Valyria. The Valyrians found and tamed dragons and used them to expand their influence in the east, though the empire would meet its untimely demise when a chain of volcanoes would erupt and destroy their entire nation while taking out a good chunk of their dragons in the process. The only surviving Valyrian family ended up being, you guessed it, the Targaryens. The father, Lord Aenar Targaryen, had a vision of Valyria's destruction and promptly moved his family to Dragonstone, leaving the Targaryens to be the only dragon-owning family left in the world. About 100 years later, Aegon the Conqueror, along with his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya, decide to fly out west on their dragons and invade Westeros. Westeros is never going to catch a break from these invasions, is it? This time, the power of the dragons was so overwhelming for the First Men / Andals that Aegon's quest pretty much set the speedrunning record for conquering Westeros. The only exception being the region of Dorne, as the Dornish utilized guerrilla warfare and had the upper hand due to the region's hot climate. Other than that, the Targaryen invasion was incredibly successful. Aegon went on and united the Seven Kingdoms, began construction on the capital city of King's Landing, and also created the Iron Throne out of the swords of his defeated enemies. Thus began the reign of the Targaryen dynasty. After the passing of Aegon the Conqueror, his son Aenys took the throne for a very short period of time, followed by his half-brother Maegor, and after that the son of Aenys, Jaehaerys I, who ushered in an 80-year period of peace and prosperity. Jaehaerys' successor Viserys I sees over the end of this period, which brings us to the start of House of the Dragon. And without spoiling anything for the people who don't read the books, let's just say things in House Targaryen are about to get ugly. About 500 years of Targaryen rule later came the reign of King Aerys II, who is much more well known as the Mad King. His rule didn't begin with madness though, as he was mostly stable and only mentally deteriorated towards the latter end of his life. During the time before Aerys had gone mad, a young Tywin Lannister is appointed Hand of the King after impressing Aerys with his ruthlessness, shutting down a rebellion, and expanding Lannister influence. Additionally, Jaime, Cersei, and Tyrion are all born within the next few years. Signs of Aerys going mad began to appear when he refused to marry off his firstborn son Rhaegar to Cersei Lannister, out of fear that the Lannister influence was expanding a bit too much. So instead, Rhaegar was married off to Princess Aelia Martell of Dorne. Aerys' sanity only continued to dwindle as he began to grow paranoid that the people believed that Tywin Lannister was the true ruler of the Seven Kingdoms and the one that was actually holding everything together. That conjoined with the fact that he was held captive by a man who didn't want to pay his taxes, made for ripe conditions to completely send him off the deep end. The event that earns Aerys the moniker the Mad King was his response to the allegations that his son Rhaegar kidnapped Lyanna Stark. These allegations were of course false, as the two actually fell in love. Rhaegar left his old wife Aelia, privately eloped with Lyanna in Dorne, and the two ended up expecting a child. Unfortunately, Lyanna's brother and father Brandon and Rickard Stark had no idea and were enraged beyond belief at her disappearance. Aerys responded to their outrage by brutally executing both Brandon and Rickard, earning him the infamous title of the Mad King. Lyanna's other brother Ned Stark and the man she was supposed to marry, Robert Baratheon, would then go on to join forces against King Aerys and start Robert's rebellion. In the 1 year the rebellion lasted, the rebels ended up taking out Rhaegar in battle and defeated the Targaryen forces. Aerys, now realizing he's on the losing side, sends his pregnant sister wife Rhaella Targaryen and his son Viserys back to Essos. Aerys then commands his soldiers to burn King's Landing to the ground in a last-ditch effort to maintain control of the situation. Luckily, Jaime Lannister realized that this would cost thousands of innocent lives, put an end to Aerys before he could carry out the order, and subsequently lived the rest of his life being known as the Kingslayer. After the rebellion ended, Ned Stark found Lyanna, who had delivered her baby but was bleeding out. Before she died, she explained the true story behind her disappearance and made Ned promise to protect the baby at all costs. This led Ned to renaming the child from Aegon Targaryen to Jon Snow and claiming him as his bastard to honor his sister's final wishes. Robert Baratheon, on the other hand, would go on to be crowned king of the Seven Kingdoms and would marry Cersei since Lyanna had now passed. In the following years, the rest of our main cast would be born, including Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon Stark, Theon Greyjoy, and Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen Baratheon, leading to season 1 of Game of Thrones. The timeline of the show begins with the Hand of the King, Jon Arryn, passing away and Ned Stark being appointed the next Hand of the King. It isn't long though until Ned discovers that Jaime and Cersei have been getting it on and making incest babies. In order to keep King Robert from finding out about her cheating, Cersei poisons him after a boar accident before Ned can expose her. She and Jaime also decided it would be a good idea to push Bran Stark out of a window to keep their secret.
The things I do for love.
Putting him in a coma until the end of the season and paralyzing him from the waist down. After Robert's passing and Littlefinger's betrayal, Joffrey Baratheon was crowned king and sentenced Ned Stark to be beheaded. This sparked a huge war within the Seven Kingdoms called the War of the Five Kings, with Stannis and Renly Baratheon coming to claim the throne, and Robb Stark, now being called the King of the North, coming to avenge his father and save his sisters being held hostage. Meanwhile, Jon Snow joins the Night's Watch, while rumors of the White Walker's return spread within the group. After a White attacks Lord Commander Jeor Mormont, he decides to lead an expedition north of the Wall to investigate the rumors. And across the sea in Essos, the Mad King's two kids, Viserys and Daenerys, plot to retake their place as the rightful rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. Viserys marries Daenerys to Khal Drogo of the Dothraki in order to have command of the Dothraki army. Viserys kinda sucks though, and is brutally taken out by Khal Drogo. Unfortunately, Khal Drogo also ends up passing away along with the unborn child of Daenerys. Daenerys does however end up hatching 3 dragon eggs and her rise officially begins. As the War of the Five Kings raged on, an order was sent out to execute all of Robert Baratheon's bastard sons in order to secure the Lannisters' claim on the Iron Throne. The only one who survived was Gendry, and after Arya made her escape from King's Landing, the two went on the run. Stannis and Renly Baratheon competed against one another for their claim on the throne as well, but it was really short-lived as Stannis and the Red Priestess Melisandre summoned a shadow creature that took out Renly. only, and Brienne of Tarth was there to witness it all. Stannis then gains control of the entire Baratheon army and attempts to directly attack King's Landing in the Battle of Blackwater Bay, only to be forced to narrowly retreat due to Tyrion's quick thinking and Tywin's reinforcements. Balon Greyjoy of the Iron Islands decides to join in the fray and attacks the north while Robb's army is away. Faced with the dilemma of following the family who practically raised him, or following his father's orders, Theon Greyjoy decides to betray the Starks by executing Bran and Rickon in order to impress his daddy. Luckily, the two are able to escape with the help of Hodor and begin to make their way to Jon. A bunch of marriage alliances are made during the war, starting with Margaery Tyrell marrying Joffrey as a way to ally House Lannister and House Tyrell, Littlefinger and Lysa Arryn allying the Lannisters with the Vale, and Myrcella Baratheon marrying Trystane Martell, allying the Lannisters with the Dornish. On the other hand, Robb Stark breaks his marriage alliance agreement with the Frey by marrying a battlefield healer to Lysa. Back out in Essos, Daenerys arrives and flees from the nation of Korth after realizing they only want her for her dragons. And north of the Wall, Jeor Mormont's expedition continues, with Jon infiltrating the Wildlings and meeting his first love interest, Ygritte. Back to the War of the Five Kings, Robb Stark was quickly losing favor with his army and allies, considering he broke the marriage alliance with House Frey. In an attempt to rebuild that relationship with the Freys, Robb had his uncle marry their daughter instead, but the entire wedding ended up being a sham. In one of the most shocking moments in television history, the Freys ally with Tywin Lannister to take out all of the Starks in a tragic event dubbed as the Red Wedding.
The Lannisters send their regards.
After this event, the North officially belongs to the Boltons. Speaking of the Boltons, Ramsay captures and tortures Theon Greyjoy to the point of castration and changes his name to Reed.
That's a good name for you.
Arya Stark leaves Gendry and ends up traveling as a hostage with the Hound, who planned on returning her for the right amount of cash. The Hound takes Arya to where the Red Wedding occurred in hopes of making a trade, but quickly discovered there's no longer any Starks there to trade Arya for. Flipping back to the Night's Watch, their members engaged in combat with the White Walkers for the first time in 8,000 years. After losing a majority of their men in battle, Sam discovers that their weakness is Valyrian steel. At the same time, Jon and the Wildlings scale the wall with the intention of attacking Castle Black. Bran, who had also been having visions recently about the Three-Eyed Raven, discovers that he has cool mind-bending powers and decides to cancel their trip to see Jon in order to learn more about his visions and newfound powers. In Essos, Daenerys obtained an army of over 8,000 unsullied warriors, coming one step closer to her goal of reclaiming the Iron Throne. King Joffrey finally gets what's coming to him and is poisoned at his wedding to Margaery. The only issue here is that Tyrion is framed for his poisoning and sentenced to death. Tyrion escapes with the help of his brother Jaime, but before leaving, Tyrion takes out his father, who has pretty much always treated him like crap. Joffrey's younger brother Tommen takes his place as king of the Seven Kingdoms, but since he's a kid, he's easily manipulated by his mother and grandfather. Sansa finally escapes King's Landing along with Littlefinger, and the two travel to the Vale to meet up with Sansa's aunt Lysa Arryn. It's here that Littlefinger marries and kills Lysa and becomes ruler of the Vale. We also learn that he had been manipulating Lysa since the very first episode, as she was the one who killed her husband and former hand of King Baratheon, Jon Arryn. Arya travels to the free city of Braavos to learn to become an assassin. Dany's army and influence continue to grow in the east as she declares herself queen of the city Meereen, and Bran finds the Three-Eyed Raven and the remaining children of the forest. The season concludes with the battle between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings, resulting in the passing of Ygritte and the remaining Wildlings either being forced to flee or being captured. After his escape from King's Landing, Tyrion travels to Essos in search of Daenerys and becomes her advisor. Cersei and Margaery fight over control of the king, but Cersei also has her hands full trying to bribe the High Sparrow and save her daughter Myrcella from being killed by the Martells. The Martells want revenge for the death of Oberyn Martell, who Tyrion chose to fight for him in a trial of combat after being falsely accused of poisoning Joffrey. Jaime goes to try to save Myrcella, but unfortunately they're a bit too late. The High Sparrow also exposes Cersei for cheating on her husband and makes her do a walk of shame throughout the city. Arya keeps training to become an assassin, now being taught by the Faceless Men, and Littlefinger offers Sansa for marriage to Ramsay Bolton, who we all know is completely terrible. Stannis hopes to take on the Boltons to take back the north, but gets trapped in a blizzard and sacrifices his daughter in order to keep moving forward. And when he finally attempted to attack the Boltons, he lost, and Brienne of Tarth ended up executing him for his role in taking out Renly back in season 2. Meanwhile, at the Wall, Jon is elected the new Lord Commander and ventures off beyond the Wall to save the Wildlings from becoming Whites. He's only able to evacuate about 5,000 of them though, because the Walkers assault the Wildling village, taking a majority of the Wildlings with them. Then Jon ends ends up being assassinated by members of the Night Watch who don't think he's fit to lead due to his views on collaborating with the wildlings. Rest in peace to a real one. Except Jon Snow is actually not dead, is resurrected by Melisandre, and his assassins are executed. With the help of Theon, Sansa escapes Ramsay Bolton, reunites with Jon, and reclaims the North after winning the Battle of the Bastards. Sadly, their younger brother Rickon Stark is taken out in the process, but their victory results in Jon being declared the next King of the North. Arya, who is now a skilled assassin after training with the Faceless Men, returns to Westeros and begins avenging her family, starting with Walder Frey. At the same time, her brother Bran is engaging in the Battle of the Three-Eyed Raven, an event in which the Night King ambushes and takes out the remaining children of the forest, the previous Three-Eyed Raven, and arguably the saddest casualty of the series, Hodor. But Bran does end up learning about Jon's true lineage and the events that led to Robert's rebellion. Daenerys continues to expand her influence as she allies with the Tyrells, Martells, and Dothrakis. And Cersei retaliates against the High Sparrows and nobles who put her on trial for her past crimes by blowing them all up. This quite literally pushes Tommen over the edge, and Cersei declares herself Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Daenerys is now more than ready to attack King's Landing, take on Cersei, and begin her war for Westeros. Euron Greyjoy allies with Cersei in hopes of earning her hand in marriage. Olenna Tyrell admits to poisoning Joffrey so that her daughter wouldn't have to deal with him before exiting the chat, and Bran, Arya, and Sansa reunite to finally put Littlefinger on trial and execute him for all the chaos he caused throughout the series. Jon Snow allies with Daenerys and captures a White in an attempt to convince Cersei to help them in the fight against the army of the dead, which ends up costing Dany a dragon. Cersei pretends to agree with their arrangement, but really was plotting to take out Daenerys when the time was right. Jon and Dany end up falling in love without the slightest clue of their familiar relation to each other, and the army of the dead, now complete with giants and a dragon, begin to invade Westeros. The story concludes with the White Walkers marching further south, culminating in the final battle of Winterfell, where Arya defeats the Night King and the army of the dead are destroyed. Jon Snow learns the truth of his lineage, and instead of being concerned with the fact that he was the rightful heir to the throne, he's more worried that he just fell in love with his aunt, which I mean, yeah, it's understandable. After the White Walkers are defeated, Daenerys, Jon, and their army attack and destroy King's Landing. The Hound has one final battle with his brother the Mountain, and Jaime returns to his sister, and the two go out together in the rubble of the crumbling city. Seeing that Dany has pretty much lost it, Jon makes the difficult choice to stab her and prevent any further casualties down the line. The show ends with Bran being crowned King of the Six Kingdoms, with the North gaining its independence, Sansa being crowned Queen of the North, Arya traveling to find what's beyond Westeros, and Jon being exiled back to the Night's Watch in order to keep the peace. Of course, we didn't get a chance to go over all the plot lines throughout the show, but hopefully this quick overview of all the major events got you as excited as I am to dive back into the world of the Iron Throne. Let's just cross our fingers that the quality stays consistent this time around.